Earth's greatest soldiers ripped the Ocampa Emperor's 3 beating hearts from his chest once they were awakened, but not before billions died under the alien boot of enslaving tyranny. Vincent Webb blinked. Fog receded. A dim light turned blinding. Something was in his eyes. He flexed, his muscles stiff. He was on his back, lying on something hard. There was absolute silence, hanging completely still. Then hissing pneumatics shattered the quiet as the cryopod lid slid open. "Captain Webb, you're being awoken," a calm feminine voice said. "Please be still, you've been asleep for 209 years. Ice crystals broke off Webb's heavy lids as he struggled to sit up. His head throbbed. His tongue was thick and dry in his mouth. His Special Forces power armor felt like it had fused to his chilled skin. With a grunt, he wrestled himself upright. "Eris, that you?" Webb croaked, voice like gravel. "It's me, Captain. Welcome to 2487 aboard the ESS Retribution. You're orbiting Neptune, and I'm afraid I have dire news. The Ocampa Empire has conquered 87% of the galaxy. They've subjugated trillions. Earth is one of the last free worlds, but the Ocampa are on the verge of discovering its location." Webb swung his legs over the side of the cryopod, joints popping. The rest of his squad still slept in their pods, all 12 of humanity's most elite secret super soldiers, the last ghosts of Project Archangel. "Show me," Webb gritted out. A view screen buzzed to life. The sneering blue face of an Ocampa filled the display, humanoid but cruel. The alien tightened a slave collar around the neck of a battered human in ceremonial robes, the ambassador. With a flick of a switch, the man's head burst like an overripe fruit, gore spattering the camera. Ocampa, standing at attention, roared in bloodthirsty applause. The display shifted to a vid of a vibrant Martian colony full of gleaming habdomes and shuttles. Then Ocampa dreadnoughts appeared in the red sky. Searing beams of plasma rained down, boiling away steel and flesh, leaving only charred, smoking ruins. "My God," Webb whispered, "they're monsters." "Humanity needs you, Captain Webb," Aris said. "You're our only hope." Rage ignited in Webb's gut, hotter than a fusion reactor. He clenched his armored fists as a growl tore from his throat. The Ocampa would pay in blood for what they'd done to Earth. Webb stood, servos whirring. It was time to wake up his squad. Webb marched over to the armory, a reinforced room stocked with racks of weapons. He pressed his palm to the biometric scanner. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Inside, his sleek black combat armor hung in an alcove. It was an advanced exoskeleton, designed to enhance his strength, speed, and durability to superhuman levels. Webb stepped into the suit, locking each piece in place over his body glove until he was fully encased. He turned to the weapon racks, selecting his loadout with care. The first was a plasma rifle, its barrel glowing an ominous blue. The dense plasma bolts it fired could melt through steel. Next, he grabbed a nanite sword, a monomolecular blade that could slice through armor like butter. Finally, he took a graviton grenade launcher. When detonated, its projectiles unleashed a localized wave of artificial gravity, crushing anything caught in the blast. "Aris, what's the status of my team?" Webb asked, mag-locking the weapons to his armor. "I'm sorry, Captain, but the rest of Project Archangel is still in cryosleep. Reviving them will take time we don't have. You'll need to undertake this mission solo." "What's the objective?" "We need intelligence on the Ocampa's military capabilities. You'll be inserting onto Zephyrus Prime, a key strategic planet they control. It's the site of a massive military base. Your job is to infiltrate the base, gather data, and disrupt their operations." "Understood. Prep a stealth shuttle for launch." Minutes later, Webb was rocketing away from the Retribution, all his weapons and equipment stowed aboard the state-of-the-art infiltration craft. Its hull was coated in radar-absorbing metamaterials, rendering it nearly invisible to sensors. As the obsidian sphere of Zephyrus Prime grew in his view screen, proximity alarms began to wail. He'd been detected. A squadron of Ocampa fighters rose from the planet, laser cannons glowing. Bolts of superheated plasma lanced through the void towards his shuttle. Webb wrenched the control yoke, sending the craft into a spiraling dive. The lasers scorched past, barely missing. He jinked and rolled, trying to shake the tails, but the fighters matched his every move. Gritting his teeth, Webb spun the shuttle to face his attackers. A targeting reticule appeared on the HUD. As it flashed red, locking on, he squeezed the trigger. A volley of missiles streaked from the shuttle's launchers. The projectiles found their mark, erupting against the Ocampa ships in blossoms of flame. Molten shards of metal pinwheeled through space, but there were too many. For each fighter he destroyed, two more took its place. Plasma bolts hammered into the shuttle's flanks, rupturing armor and igniting fires. Alarms screamed. Atmosphere vented from a dozen breaches. The shuttle was being torn apart. Webb fought with the controls, trying to keep the mortally wounded craft aloft, but it was a losing battle. The planet's gravity well sucked him in. The shuttle plummeted, trailing smoke and fire as it knifed through the atmosphere. Friction turned the hull to a cherry red. Gale force winds screamed over the wings. At the last moment, he managed to wrench the nose up, turning his descent into a controlled glide. The shuttle hit the ground hard, skidding and bouncing across the landscape, shearing away great swathes of vegetation. It finally crashed to a halt, half buried in the loamy soil of a dense alien jungle. Webb kicked out the fractured cockpit canopy, clambering out of the wreckage. His armor had protected him from the impact, leaving him unscathed. But as he surveyed his surroundings, he saw nothing but thick foliage in every direction, stretching out to the horizon. Checking the navcom in his HUD, his heart sank. He'd crashed miles off course from his intended insertion point. The Ocampa base was still dozens of clicks away, through uncharted hostile territory. But he had no choice. The mission was paramount. Humanity depended on him. Checking to make sure his weapons were still intact after the crash, he unslung his plasma rifle and set off into the jungle. His armor's camouflage systems rippled, advanced metamaterials altering their coloration and texture to match the environment, rendering Webb nearly invisible against the backdrop of leaves and shadows. He moved swiftly but cautiously, all senses on high alert, scanning for any sign of Ocampa patrols. They were out there somewhere, and if they discovered him, the entire mission would be in jeopardy. He had to reach that base undetected. The survival of Earth depended on it. Webb trudged through the alien jungle for hours on end, his enhanced muscles aching with fatigue. The humid air clung to his skin, and strange animal calls echoed through the towering trees. But finally, he reached the outskirts of the Ocampa base. It was a sprawling complex of stark metal buildings, ringed by high walls bristling with gun turrets. Webb activated his armor's scanning systems. Holographic displays flickered to life in his HUD, showing him a detailed layout of the base's defenses. There, a small service entrance, guarded by only a pair of sentries. It was his best shot at getting inside undetected. He crept closer, using his armor's chameleon coating to blend into the foliage. When he was in range, he struck, 2 quick slashes of his nanite blade, and the guards crumpled soundlessly to the ground, their throats slit before they could utter a sound. Webb slipped inside the base, following the route his scans had plotted to the central command bunker. The door was sealed by an encrypted lock, but it was no match for his armor's hacking suite. Within seconds, he was inside, making his way to a computer terminal. His fingers flew over the keys as he wormed his way into the base's mainframe, siphoning off terabytes of critical data. Troop deployments, weapons specs, even the location of the Emperor's flagship. It was all here. With this intel, the Resistance would stand a fighting chance. Suddenly alarms began to wail, bathing the bunker in pulsing red light. He'd been detected. Webb cursed, yanking the data drive from the terminal and sprinting for the exit. He emerged into the base's main courtyard to find a platoon of Ocampa soldiers waiting for him, weapons trained on his position. At their head was Commander Zahn, a cruel sneer on his grey-skinned face. Zahn was infamous, a ruthless tactician who took sadistic pleasure in grinding his foes beneath his heel. He leveled a plasma-charged battle axe at Webb, the wicked blade crackling with energy. "Surrender, human filth," Zarn spat. "You've nowhere to run." Webb just smiled grimly beneath his helmet. "I don't need to run." He opened fire with his plasma rifle, superheated bolts scything through the Ocampa ranks. Soldiers screamed as they were reduced to molten slag, the stench of charred flesh filling the air. Webb was a blur of motion, his enhanced reflexes letting him dodge the hail of return fire with ease. He unslung a volley of graviton grenades, the projectiles sucking Ocampa into crushing singularities before exploding in dazzling novas of shrapnel. In moments the platoon was decimated. Only Zarn still stood, his armor dented and scorched, but his eyes full of hate. He charged at Webb, battle axe held high. Webb met his strike with his nanite blade, the molecular edge cleaving through the haft of the axe like paper. Zarn snarled, throwing aside the ruined weapon and attacking with armored fists. They traded blows in a brutal melee, servos and bones alike, cracking under the onslaught. But for all Zarn's cruelty, Webb was the better fighter. He caught the commander with an uppercut to the jaw, then spun into a roundhouse kick that sent him flying. Before Zarn could rise, Webb was on him. The nanite blade flashed, and Zarn's head tumbled from his shoulders, his face frozen in a rictus of shock. Webb staggered to his feet, his armor battered and his body bruised. But he was alive, and he had the data humanity needed to survive. Reinforcements were already pouring into the courtyard, plasma rifles spitting deadly fire. Webb sprinted for the perimeter wall, bullets sparking off his armor's energy shields. He vaulted over the wall, landing in a crouch on the other side. A sleek Ocampa fighter was parked on a nearby landing pad, unguarded in the commotion. Webb leapt into the cockpit, hurriedly familiarizing himself with the alien controls. The engines roared to life, anti-grav generators lifting the ship off the ground. Plasma bolts hammered into the fuselage as the Ocampa troops opened fire, but he wrenched the ship into a steep climb, rocketing up through the atmosphere. In moments he had broken free of the planet's gravity well. The inky blackness of space embraced him, stars glittering cold and distant. Webb checked the navigational computer, plotting a course back to the Retribution. He had struck a blow against the Ocampa today. Their base was in ruins, their commanders slain, their secrets stolen. But the war was far from over. The Ocampa still controlled most of the galaxy, and their thirst for conquest would not be slaked by a single defeat. As Webb gunned the engines, speeding deeper into the void, he knew that many more battles awaited him, but for now he allowed himself a small smile. The Ocampa had ruled this galaxy for far too long, grinding species after species beneath their boots. At long last, they would know the taste of fear. Webb would make sure of that. Webb rocketed back to the Retribution, docking the stolen Ocampa fighter in the hangar bay. He sprinted through the ship's corridors, ignoring the surprised looks from crew members as he burst onto the bridge. "Harris, I've got the intel," he barked, yanking the data drive from his armor and jamming it into the console. "Analyze it now." The AI's holographic avatar flickered to life, her face a mask of concentration as she parsed the flood of data. "Incredible," she breathed. "Captain, this is it. The key to bringing down the Ocampa." She brought up a schematic, highlighting a small device nestled deep within the Ocampa ship's shield generators. Their shields have a fatal flaw. A precise sequence of energy pulses will cause a cascading overload, shutting down their defenses. Webb leaned in, eyes hungry. "Then that's our target. Prep the team for immediate deployment." He turned on his heel, marching down to the cryo bay. One by one, he keyed in the awakening sequence for his soldiers. Pods hissed open, frigid mist pouring out, as the members of Project Archangel stirred. Sergeant Reaper emerged first, a mountain of a man bristling with weapons. His armor was festooned with ammo belts and grenade bandoliers, a rotary cannon mag-locked to his back. He cracked his neck, glowering. Next was Corporal Ghost, slim and wiry, her armor matte black and adorned with a multitude of shimmering hollow projectors. She seemed to melt into the shadows, nearly invisible even to Webb's enhanced senses. Finally came Lieutenant Valkyrie, her sleek armor gleaming silver, a pair of jump jets mounted on the back. Her face was angular and sharp, eyes glinting with fierce intelligence. Webb gathered them around a hollow table, bringing up the schematics Ares had discovered. "Here's the plan," he growled. "We're going to hit them where it hurts. The Ocampa flagship, the Dreadnought." He pointed to the shield generator. "Reaper, Valkyrie, you'll plant charges here at the main reactor. When they blow, it'll cripple the ship." They nodded grimly. Webb turned to Ghost. "You're on infiltration. Get to the control room, plant a virus to shut down their weapons and shields." She saluted, already fading into the background. Webb's face hardened. "I'll take the bridge. It's time Emperor Janus answered for his crimes." Hours later, they were in position, a stolen Ocampa transport drifting towards the Dreadnought's hangar bay. Webb and his team were disguised in holographic Ocampa armor, indistinguishable from the real thing. As they marched out onto the deck, Webb's heart pounded. The slightest misstep would expose them, but his team was flawless, moving with the precise discipline of the Ocampa guards. At a prearranged signal, they split up, each heading for their target. Webb rode the lift to the bridge, fingers tightening around the hilt of his nanite blade. The doors slid open, revealing the command deck, and there, standing before the great viewport, was Emperor Janus himself. He was tall and gaunt, clad in ornate armor studded with psionic amplifiers. He turned as Webb approached, eyes widening in recognition. "You!" he hissed, "the human who has caused so much trouble." Webb said nothing, simply drawing his blade. Janus snarled, activating his amplifier. A wave of telekinetic force slammed into Webb, hurling him back, but his armor held, gravitic dampeners absorbing the blow. He lunged forward, blade slashing. Janus countered with a kinetic blast, tearing a console from the wall and flinging it at Webb. He dodged, rolling beneath the projectile and coming up with his rifle. A lance of plasma scorched across Janus's armor, leaving a molten scar. The ship shuddered as distant explosions boomed. Reaper and Valkyrie had reached the reactor. Janus roared in fury, redoubling his assault. The air crackled with energy as he ripped up deck plates and bulkheads, whipping them at Webb in a hurricane of shrapnel. Webb weathered the storm, armor barely holding against the onslaught. Warnings flared across his HUD as the ship began to break apart around them, atmosphere howling out into space. In a final desperate lunge, Webb hurled himself at Janus. The Emperor met him head-on, amplifiers flaring as he unleashed a massive telekinetic wave. At the same instant, Webb's nanite blade found its mark, punching through Janus's armor and deep into his chest. The double blow hurled them apart, sending them smashing through the viewport in a spray of shattered plexiglass. Webb tumbled out into the void, Janus's body still impaled on his blade. Webb and Janus tumbled through the void, still grappling even as the life drained from their battered bodies. The nanite blade protruded from Janus's chest, dark blood crystallizing in the vacuum. But even with a sword through his heart, the Ocampa Emperor refused to die quietly. His psionic amplifiers flared, ripping into Webb's mind with spikes of agony. Webb's HUD flashed red with critical damage warnings, life support failing, power cells drained. His armor, once an impenetrable shell, now little more than cracked ceramic and sparking circuits. He had only one option left. He input a code into his gauntlet, fighting through the pain of Janus's psychic assault. The armor's reactor whined, ready to overload in a burst of atomic fire. If this was to be his end, he would make sure Janus shared it. "Burn in hell," Webb spat over the comm, his voice a ragged snarl. Then he embraced the Emperor in a final deadly clinch and initiated the overload. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then a new sun bloomed in the darkness, a sphere of nuclear fury consuming both warriors in its brilliant heart. The shockwave slammed into the gutted wreckage of the Dreadnought, shattering its remnants into molten shards. On the stolen shuttle, Reaper, Ghost, and Valkyrie watched in mute horror as the blast washed over them. Their leader, their brother-in-arms, was gone, immolated in the unforgiving depths of space. Ghost bowed her head, tears glinting unseen behind her visor. Reaper's fists clenched until servos complained, a growl building in his throat. Valkyrie simply stared, unblinking, as if she could will Webb back into existence through sheer force of desire. But there could be no return from this sacrifice. Webb was gone, and with him, Emperor Janus, scourge of the galaxy. The Ocampa fleet hung dead in space, their nerve center destroyed, their ruler slain. Chaos erupted across their empire as the news spread, subject worlds rising in revolt, Ocampa governors and generals turning on each other in bloody bids for power. The super soldiers seized this chance, rallying the disparate rebel factions under a single flag. Valkyrie's strategic brilliance guided their strikes, hitting the Ocampa where they were weakest. Reaper's fury was the tip of the spear, breaking their strongholds with unrelenting force. And Ghost was the unseen blade, assassinating key leaders, sowing disinformation and discord. The war was brutal and protracted, 1,000,000 battlefields soaked in blood and ash. The Ocampa fought with the desperate savagery of a cornered beast, and the rebels with the righteous anger of the long oppressed. Planets were scoured, fleets obliterated, whole species driven to the brink. But in the end, the Ocampa could not stand against the tide of those they had wronged. Their empire crumbled, their armies scattered, their cities razed. The galaxy was free, the yoke of their tyranny at last thrown off. From the ashes a new order began to emerge, one of cooperation and rebuilding, where the scars of war could perhaps in time begin to heal. Reaper, Ghost and Valkyrie, heroes all, took up the burden of leadership, guiding the fledgling alliance with wisdom hard-won through sacrifice. But even in this moment of triumph, their thoughts were with the one who was not there to share it. Webb, the man who had given everything to light the spark of revolution. His loss was a wound that would never fully heal, a void in their hearts, and in the galaxy he had died to save. They stood now in the ruined heart of the Ocampa homeworld, a world none of their species had seen in untold generations. Around them, the wreckage of the imperial palace smouldered, the once proud symbols of Ocampa might now shattered and scorched. Valkyrie reached down, picking up a twisted shard of metal from the rubble. It was blackened and pitted, but she could still make out a fragment of the Ocampa sigil, the hated mark of their former masters. She gripped it until its edges bit into her palm, then hurled it away with a cry of mingled rage and grief. Reaper laid a heavy hand on her shoulder, the weight of it saying more than words ever could. Ghost simply looked to the sky, to the stars that had once been denied to them, and now stood open and waiting. There would be time to grieve, to honor the fallen, time to rebuild, to forge bonds between species that had only known each other as master and slave, time to make sure Webb's sacrifice had not been in vain. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but they would walk it together, these survivors, these heroes, for the dream of freedom, so long denied, for the memory of a man who had given his all to make it real. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.